Prior to the last local government elections in 2019, left-wing activists convinced foreign residents in Budapest to vote for Karácsony, the current mayor of the city, the united left-wing opposition's candidate. The task for the left was a relatively simple one. These expats don't speak or read Hungarian. Certainly not nearly well enough to understand Hungary's internal political situation and history without assistance. So we can say that they were used by the left and they were exploited for their votes. Probably they will try the same this year. Let's give the expats some advice on what to watch out for.
That assistance was given, but it was extremely one-sided. Expats in general, especially if they've grown up in the West, are already conditioned by international media to believe that the Hungarian government is led by Darth Vader. Years of conditioning to disapprove of the Hungarian government, reinforced by a lack of comprehension on the ground, means that a knee-jerk reaction is hardly unexpected. Unable to comprehend Hungarian politics from within due to a lack of language, these temporary residents of Budapest are reliant on sources located outside of Hungary. That's hardly ideal. The left-wing activists in 2019 therefore had an easy time of it. They were repeating the half-truths and lies that the foreign press has been peddling about Hungary's government for years. Preaching to the converted about sums the situation up. But let's try to redress the balance. After all, it's only fair that people should be enabled to make a responsible decision, something which is impossible if they've only heard half of the story. For a start, one thing Hungary's left-wing liberal opposition works hard to achieve is that people view anything connected to public life in terms of national politics. This is misleading. This is wrong. As in any country you'd like to mention, there are national and local politics. The two should not be confused. Local government elections are all to do with the services provided for local communities, nothing more.
There's a very important thing to understand at this point. These elections have nothing to do with your worldview, but rather which elected official will be best suited to ensuring that your personal life improves in the place where you live. Potholes, street lighting, public transport, improvement or deterioration? That's the question, basically.
That's right. It's very important to remember that these elections aren't about the bigger picture. These elections aren't about the national or international scene, no matter how hard the left try to convince us all of that. No, these elections concern services we expect in the places where we live. Remember that when the left try to force the idea that these elections are about whether you approve or disapprove of the Hungarian government and the Hungarian Prime Minister. That's not what this is about. Furthermore, expats temporarily located in a country which is not their own should remember that they're not eligible to vote on who forms the Hungarian government. That's a right which is reserved for the Hungarians. So, forget what you read in the international press about Orbán and the Hungarian government. This is not the place or time, and anyway, it's not your place to decide on things like that. The upcoming local elections are exactly what it says on the label. Elections to determine who can best provide a better standard of living for those who live here. In 2019, the left-wing activists convinced foreigners that a united opposition's candidate would make Budapest a better city. Those of us who know Karácsony of old doubted that this would happen. That view has been borne out. As was suspected at the time, electing Karácsony merely meant that those who placed him into power, infamous corrupt left-wing politicians, were guaranteed unlimited access to the city's coffers. Predictably, if unfortunately, they've worked hard to empty those coffers into their own pockets. Services have been cut. The message from Karácsony is that this is due to a decrease in local government funding. But that's a lie. An oft-repeated lie, but a lie nonetheless. Local governments have more money than at any time previously in history. If that weren't enough, in 2019 the outgoing mayor of Budapest left in excess of 200 billion forints on the Metropolitan Bank account. Not a sum to be sneezed at, and yet services have been cut, litter bins have been removed from the streets, cleaning services have been reduced, and now, after 5 years, the city is teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. The people who manoeuvred the hopelessly ineffectual Karadzic into position have been stealing taxpayers' money since day one of his inauguration. One example of how those who own the mayor make sure they get their cut. Do you know how many advisors Karadzic has? 42. 42 main advisors. For a mayor in charge of a city of approximately 2 million. 42. That's a shameful, blatant example of how these people intend to rob the city blind.
Budapest, as you probably have noticed, is dirtier than it was, smellier than it was, and now has an ever-increasing army of homeless people hanging around and probably begging. And we're told that we shouldn't complain about the homeless. We're told that they have the right to live wherever they choose to live. We are told that we are being unfair when we blame the homeless for sleeping on public transport, for begging or for harassing tourists and for urinating wherever they see fit. But what about the rights of everybody else? What about the rights of people to travel on public transport which doesn't smell like, well, you know what it smells like?
What about the right to be able to sit down on a bus seat without having to worry about how recently you had a tetanus jab? Surely the residents of Budapest, not only the homeless, have rights too. Karadzic, Mr. Ineffectual, has aided and abetted in the corruption which is second nature to those who sponsored his election to the position of mayor of Budapest. Ferenc Gyurcsány oversaw and organised such levels of corruption when he was Prime Minister of Hungary that he all but managed to bankrupt the country. Remember the situation with the Greek economic collapse? Hungary had it worse, thanks to the socialist thieves in power. And they clung to power. When in power, they did nothing. They achieved nothing, and then they lied to the electorate to swing another victory. And Gyurcsány admitted as much too. A secret audio recording was released in which he admitted that he had done nothing but lie morning, noon and night to fool people into voting for them again. This was the start of a period in which Gyurcsány bound himself with iron hoops to one of the most shameful periods of Hungary's long history. Tensions were high in Hungary after it was revealed that Gyurcsány and his government had played the nation for fools. On the 50th anniversary of the 1956 uprising against the Soviet Union, tensions rose even higher. In 1956, the Hungarians had fought against Soviet rule. 50 years on, the successors of the Soviet collaborators were lying through their teeth to retain power. The less it changes, the more it stays the same. People were angry with Gyurcsány and his socialists, but those in power meant to stay there. Taking personal control of the police, Gyurcsány gave orders that the police were to make themselves unidentifiable. Balaclavas to cover their faces, ID numbers removed from uniforms. If that weren't enough, the police were issued with extendable steel batons. Normally the issuance of these weapons requires an imminent terrorist threat, but not on this occasion. The police ran riot. They deliberately herded a small group of troublemakers towards the families heading home following a Fidesz commemorative rally. Having set the lie that they couldn't discern between who was a troublemaker and who was just going home after a rally, the police attacked people indiscriminately. Men, women, visiting tourists, serving MPs. In the eyes of the police that day, everyone was fair game. And I need hardly mention that the international media and EU decided to look away. There was no international outcry. There were no passionate speeches made condemning a government which attacked its own people. There were no calls for funding to be withheld. Gyurcsány, the man who gazed adoringly at Putin, the man who presented Putin with a puppy as a present. This is the man who is responsible for the worst police atrocity in recent Hungarian history. A man who remains a potent force in Hungarian internal politics. And what has Karácsony, the puppet, achieved? Not a lot. Certainly not what he promised. Services have been cut and sometimes slashed. Unfulfilled promises lie cluttered at his feet. This man has not improved our lot. This man has not improved our lives. This man has not created concord between car driver and cyclists. This man has ruined the roads and pavements of Budapest. This man has created cycle lanes which are both pointless and dangerous. This man is a fool. So this is a heads up to the expats of Budapest who are planning to vote in the upcoming local elections. Don't let your passions run away with you.
Perhaps you feel strongly about the Hungarian national government, but you truly don't have a dog in the fight when we're talking about the Hungarian parliament. So let it go and concentrate on what local elections are truly about, local communities.
Karácsony carries a bad pedigree. His master carries the worst of all possible pedigrees. And Budapest has been scarred, not beautified, by the half-baked policies of the Metropolitan Administration over the past 5 years. If you're going to vote, vote responsibly. Remove Karácsony so that the majority of Budapest, once more, become the focus of local government. Think before you vote. And remember, this election is about your local community, not about the Hungarian government. Reject Karácsony's lies about the reason for the lack of funds and replace him with someone who actually wants to see Budapest improve. Our goal of living in a cleaner environment, of travelling on cleaner public transport, of walking cleaner streets, begins with us cleaning out the corrupt Karácsony.